you do a deep dive is when things get very, very awkward and difficult.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all around the world.
Once they had the vowels in place, then you could put them all over the place and you get many, many different variations. And that's where the problem with Qira'at comes. The Qira'at comes in which school, which reader, which one are you going to follow? Which set of dots and vowels are you going to follow? And that's why we now have first 7, and then 3 more, which is 10, and then another 20, which makes 30, that were then came into existence by the time of the 15th century. But this is fascinating because what we have been told and what they all tell you is that this all happened in the time of Muhammad. Remember, that story of Umar hearing the recitation from one guy that's different than what he had been told. He grabs him by the shirt and he drags him into Muhammad and he says, listen to him. And Muhammad listens to him. And Muhammad said, well, that's okay. That's fine. It's been given in 7 ahruf, 7 qira'at, 7 different readings. That happened at the time of Uthman. I'm sorry, that happened at the time of Muhammad, right? Mm-hmm. Where do you get that story from? Who is the one that tells you that story?
You have that in Bukhari, right?
It's Al-Bukhari that tells you that. And when did Al-Bukhari die? He died in 870. So who was the one that canonized that viewpoint? That's Ibn Mujahid. He died in 936. So this story about Muhammad and what was going on in Muhammad's time about these different 7 readings, that comes from the 9th and 10th century, redacted back onto the 7th century. David, do you know of any place in the 7th century where you can find this story?
No, but I don't know where we can find any stories
okay.
about early Islam.
So everything we're going to hear from the Muslims, everything we're going to hear from Yasir Qadhi, everything that Muhammad Hijab is dependent on is not from the 7th century. It's not even from the 8th century. It's all from the 9th and 10th century. Now let's ask ourselves as a Christian, are you dependent on if you're going to take the same category for us as Christians, that means we would know nothing about Jesus Christ. We would know nothing about who Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John were until the 3rd century. How would you defend Jesus Christ or the crucifixion or the resurrection if you only had people that were first writing it down in the 3rd and 4th century for that which is happening in the 1st century? How could we defend that?
We don't use any 3rd century sources. We only use 1st century sources.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Now, why is it that we haven't pushed this onto the Muslims? Everything they're going to tell us comes from the 9th and 10th century, but nothing comes from the 7th and 8th century or the early 8th century. And that's why when Yasir Qadhi says that this created him a crisis of faith, I don't think he has yet to know what the real crisis of faith that's coming for him. And that we're going to get later on when we bring someone else into the whole picture. But let's go ahead and show the next picture, because the next picture, the next clip, I think is where we're really going to start unpacking the real problem that went on in that interview.
Oh, real quick before we move on, Silent Noisy here said, "You are shaking my faith." But spelled shake, like shake Yasir Qadhi. Shaking my faith. Anyway, I wanted to put this up before I forgot it, because that would be a funny title for a video or something like that. Shaking my faith. Given all the people who say their faith has been shaken by Yasir Qadhi's recent admissions. But I just wanted to bring in one thing before we continue with the video, all along the lines of Uthman burning all of the manuscripts. Guys, do you see how Islam really hasn't changed down to the present time, right? Once they start realizing, wait a minute, we've got all these differences in the way we're reciting the Quran and so on, and this is going to cause this huge crisis. And then you get down to the present time. So you're talking almost 14 centuries later. Sheikh Yasir Qadhi admits, guys, come on, we need to get past, there's definitely some problems with our perfect preservation belief that many of you Muslims have. Once you start digging a little deeper, you find out you got some major problems, and it's not really answering the questions. And what's the response from Islam? You need to delete that footage. You need to start blocking. You're destroying everyone's faith. It's better to lie about it and pretend that none of that is there, so that you don't hurt our confidence. And just to show you how bad this is right now, just to show you how bad this has gotten. This is I wanted to share this copyright takedown here. So this is a copyright strike. And if you look towards the bottom left-hand corner, you see right under where it says strike on June 19th. So that's today. Strike on June 19th. Look right below that. Content removed by Yasir Qadhi. Content removed by Yasir Qadhi. This is a copyright takedown because I was playing some clips from his video. Now, anyone who knows anything about how copyright works, you can take clips of people's material, especially if you're using those clips or quotations for the purpose of education or criticism, which is exactly what I was using those clips for. You can't just take like an entire lecture or something like that and post it yourself, but you're allowed to use excerpts and to use clips, quotations, and so on. I mean, think the way Yasir Qadhi's moving. If you simply quoted something he said in a paper or something like that, he could say, "Oh, that's my copyrighted material." No, in the West, people have always understood if you were to stop people from being able to respond to one another and take clips of other people and quote people, if you were to stop that, you're basically shutting down open discussion of ideas. So they put the concept of fair use into law, meaning if you are using clip, you're not using the entire thing, you're using portions of it for purposes of education and criticism and so on, you're allowed to do that all day. So notice, that is exactly what my video was. This would be laughed out of court if it were brought into court. Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, when you go to do this, they make sure you understand what is allowed and what is not allowed. So Sheikh Yasir Qadhi knows that he is deliberately filing a false copyright complaint to get my material taken down temporarily, because there's no way I would lose this, right? Eventually the video that was taken down, eventually that video will be back up. It's indisputable. It could be, a couple weeks if he agrees that his copyright complaint is bogus. It could be longer than that if he actually wants to go to court, in which case he's going to have to pay all my legal fees when he loses and the judge laughs it out of court. But here's the point. He's so desperate to shut down me pointing out what he said. That's all that video was. It's me criticizing what he said, me pointing out, look at all these things he just admitted. And after the backlash he got from his own community, from the Muslim community, you're destroying our faith, he had to take that down. You can go to his video now. There are no more comments. Why? Because if you read through the comments, I wish I'd screenshotted them. I did not. I should have anticipated him taking these comments down, because Muslims in the comment section were saying things like, "You are destroying my faith and you are going to have to answer before Allah on why you destroyed my faith on the judgment day." They were saying things like that. And so he just took down the comments so he wouldn't have to see these. But notice, I don't want to see all these comments. Block them. This guy's taking video clips to expose what I said, which is what you're supposed to do, right? This how open dialogue works. So no, I have to file a false copyright to get rid of that material. What is this? These guys are the modern day Uthmans. Muhammad Hijab, Yasir. These are the modern Uthmans, burning all the evidence that exposes them. These are awesome times, guys. As easy as it is to look at something like that and get mad, once you understand what the panic, the fear that is underlying their actions right now, the panic mode that they're in, the desperation in that community. Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, knowing that, wow, Muslims are attacking me, and unbelievers are using it to destroy people's faith in the Quran. I have to silence all this. And notice, there was only one way out of this. Once he said all that stuff in Muhammad Hijab's interview, there was one way forward for Yasir Qadhi, for him to say, okay, I said, it's a long discussion. You really have to understand. So I'm going to post a 20-hour series going through all this to help everyone understand. And then you'll understand why we can still believe the Quran is the word of God, even though it has all these problems. But he doesn't want to do that. Why? Because he still does not want Muslims to know about those problems. And so there's no way out. And now they're in lockdown mode. We need to lock all this stuff down. They're going to scramble. They're going to get, Hatun is has multiple copyright strikes against her channel from Adnan Rashid, from playing clips by him. They're all using the same method. They're all filing fake copyright claims, hate speech claims. They're all doing it. Why? Because they are in the tradition of Uthman, where you destroy the evidence, hide the evidence, instead of actually dealing with the evidence. Anything you wanted to add, Jay, before we watch some more?
We haven't said what the whole problem is. Why is it that they are so concerned with preserving the text? And it has nothing to do with a desire on their part. It has nothing to do with something that's come out in the modern day. This has to do with the Quran itself. The Quran makes that claim. In chapter 85, verse 22, it's very clear that the Quran itself are derived from the preserved tablets. These are the eternal tablets. These are the uncreated Quran. So it makes that claim itself. In chapter 10, verse 15 of the Quran, and in chapter 15, verse 9 of the Quran, and in chapter 18, verse 27 of the Quran, it says that Allah preserves the Quran and guards it from corruption. So if the Quran makes this claim that it's guarded by Allah himself, then there can be no human interference, there could be no human interaction. This cannot have any human intervention at all. If that is the case, it destroys not only God's word, but it destroys this inimitability. And they have to claim this inimitability. So they're between a rock and a hard place. Even Yasir Qadhi is between a rock and a hard place. Mm-hmm. And you're going to see that later on in the clip. You're going to see how he then comes and solves this problem. Because good old hijab wants him to solve this problem. Watch and see. It's not going to come up yet. It'll come up later on. Look and see how Yasir Qadhi solved this problem 25 years ago at Yale University. He has to preserve the text because God preserves the text. Mm-hmm. And this is the eternal text. We don't make these claims about our Bible. Thank God we don't make our claims that our Bible is eternal. Thank God we know that it was written by man. We don't make the claims that it is eternal. We don't make the claims that it was sent down, inspired by God, but not eternally and sent down like it was to Muhammad over a 22-year period between 610 and 632. We would say that it was complete when it was formed, like the Muslims, but as far as unchanged, that's the other thing they have to preserve, the idea that it never changing. Because if it is changed, that's human intervention. Once you admit any human intervention with even one word, with one letter, even some Muslims say even with one dot. Once you do that, you're then saying that man has now interceded for God. Man has now changed God's holy word. And that cannot at all ever be admitted to. So you can see the dilemma, not only for the Yasir Qadhis over here, but also the Muhammad hijab. They have to hold up this inimitability. They have to hold up this preservation. They dare not acquiesce, whether they are from the academic world or whether they are from the traditional world. They cannot acquiesce on this one point. On that, they are both agreed. So how are they going to come to this conclusion? Let's see what Yasir Qadhi says.
And by the way, you mentioned the position that Yasir Qadhi is now in. When he came out and admitted all this stuff that we're going to be watching here, when he came out and admitted this stuff, Muslims obviously went into a rage that he was hurting their faith and so on. But, people like me, I was looking at it going, wow, I have a lot of respect for this guy for admitting all of these things right now, even though there's going to be a backlash. I have respect for him for his willingness to face the backlash that's going to come to him. I have to respect his courage and speaking truthfully. And then, of course, as soon as the backlash, so at that point, he could have stood his ground afterwards. He could have stood his ground and said, look, I know I upset a lot of people. I know you're upset at me, but ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I can't lie to you. There are some issues here that if you've been told perfect preservation right down to the letter, it is not true. It's not true. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to lie to you? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And if everyone uses this against me, then so be it. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to diverge from the truth. He could have did that, and he would have had my perpetual respect for that. Instead, as soon as the backlash came, he immediately backed down. He blamed Islamophobes. He said, "This is all Islamophobes. They're all doing this, and they're taking things out of context and so on." And then it's now I need to get rid of the comment section, start filing false copyright claims. And so now whereas before it would have been Muslims upset at him and other people actually respecting him and taking him more seriously. Yeah. Now, instead of that, it's Muslims are still angry at him, and I view him as a coward now. I view him as a total deceptive coward, right? If you're filing a false copyright complaint to cover up information because your feelings are hurt by the backlash, now I regard you as a lying coward. So now he's in trouble with everyone, and we'll see why. All right, here we go.
Well, let me get to the clip. Let me just say one more thing. At Speaker's Corner, one of the things we were always told is that you don't want to get a very tall ladder. because the higher the ladder you stand on, the further you're going to fall.
I get it.
And I think this is the problem right now with the Quran. When you have these verses like chapter 10, verse 15, chapter 15, verse 9, and chapter 18, verse 27, the Quran itself has put it up on such a high pedestal, it's put it up on such a high level, that it is easy for now to destroy that. And that's why I feel sorry for Muslims. I feel sorry for the Yasir Qadhis. I feel sorry for the Muhammadi Jobs. They are in a dilemma here because they've got to argue preservation. They dare not leave that one text, because if there's any notion that there is any human intervention, it destroys the Quran. If it destroys the Quran, it destroys everything they believe. This is at the foundation of everything they believe. Remember, everything that Muslims go to is one book modeled by one man. The Book of the Man. You've heard me do this many times, David.
Book of the
Man. Book of the Man. You've got to go to that book. You've got to go to that man. And what we're seeing here is the book starting to crack. We're seeing the edifice, the bottom rungs starting to fail. And that's why what you saw there a week and a half ago was not just the two worlds colliding. It was also the two worlds realizing we don't know how to defend this. We still don't know how to defend this. That was 25 years ago he had that crisis. Let's go and see how he does it. Let's see what he says.
Here we go. Back to Sheikh Yasir Qadhi and Muhammad Hijab.
Was in relation to this question of the relationship between the ahruf and the qira'at, basically.
No. The crisis I had wasn't that. The crisis I had was, well, yeah, that was what generated. But what was the crisis? The crisis was very simple. Traditional understandings of ahruf and qira'at cannot answer some of these pressing questions that are now being poked by our people by our academics, by their academics outside of the faith tradition. You see, in a Muslim environment, there's always some respect that we have for the Quran. We should. In a Muslim environment, we'll press a little bit and then we'll say, okay, khalas, sami'na wa ata'na. And that's great, alhamdulillah. When you go to academia, they don't have that red line. And they're going to just, the famous story of the emperor with no clothes. They're going to just point out, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not true, and this and that. And they'll bring issues, which I'm not going to mention explicitly, that you know are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new. They'll bring you riwayat and they'll bring you athar, and then you add to that very well-known issues of, I don't even want to be explicit. And then you bring on top of that makhtutat, and then. And it's very clear to you and to every single very advanced student and specialist that the standard narrative has holes in it. That's what I'm going to say. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions. These are now well-known within the Western Academy, that they're bringing forth issues. Their level of now knowledge is leaps and bounds above what it used to be, 100 years ago. What is happening in the last few years is not me anymore. It's the Western academics. These problems are now becoming mainstream. And by and large, our ulama in the Eastern world are not aware, by and large, of what's going on in the Western side of things. And they're not answering those questions in a manner that it needs to be answered.
Well, those are the Yasir Qadhi clips we had pulled up. But guys, if you take nothing else away from what Sheikh Yasir Qadhi said, just remember that there are holes in the narrative, ladies and gentlemen. There are holes in the narrative. What's the narrative? Well, it's that Muslim scholars have all of this stuff figured out, and all for the narrative at the popular level, it's perfect preservation right down to the letter. And if you do a little research and you start coming across all these differences in different versions of the Quran, like if you actually look at the different Qurans that Hatun Tash puts out and so on, if you look at those differences and you start wondering, well, don't worry, scholars have all of this figured out. They understand, we've got the ahruf and we got the kirat, and we understand the relationship between the ahruf and the kirat, and how that all relates to the Uthmanic recension. We understand how all of this works together, and that's what you'll hear at the popular level. If you start digging into this, you'll start to hear, oh, we've got all this figured out, and Yasir Qadhi lets the cat out of the bag and says, there are holes in the narrative. There are problems with this story. Jay, did you want to comment on some holes in the narrative?
My goodness, I was just writing this. I wrote these notes down as he was going through. The traditional understanding of ahruf and kirat cannot answer pressing questions by Western academics. See, we're the problem. Mm-hmm. It's the Western academics that are the problem. Now he's blaming us for even asking these questions. But I love it when he talked about that red line. And he put his hand up there and he says, there's a red line beyond which we don't go. See, we have a respect for the Quran. We have a respect. We won't go beyond that. We just accept that there are different traditions. We just accept that there are different get-off and different ahrus. We don't ever ask this. But see, I live in the West. I live in America. And here, the West, they go beyond that red line. There's the problem. And you Easterners, those of you in the East, those of you in the traditional crowd, you don't have to live in the world that I'm living in, is what he's saying. I have to live in this world. I got my credibility. I've got my reputation to worry about, and I have to straddle both worlds. Can you see? He did not want to answer this question because he still has that reputation from Yale University and from all the different TV shows he's been. He's been all over the TV here in the United States. He is the moderate face of Islam that everybody loves. And he's got to still live in that world. And he's still got to be able to communicate that world. And he still has to maintain some type of balance. But over here, in the traditional world on this side, you've got a whole different category of people that want him to come hand down and just say, this is not a problem. This is not a problem. And he says, listen, that's where you are. You don't go, you don't want, you know it's not a problem because you don't go past that red line. I don't go past that red line. I cannot go past that red line. Except 25 years ago, and remember, he said, I had a crisis, and this got out of the bag now. He didn't want it to get out of the bag. If you look at the first hour and 20 minutes, you can see that they brought this up. And that's why it's fascinating that he's blaming even the converts coming up with Muhammad Hijab's from his material, his converts there in London who are causing this problem. He didn't want people to know about this crisis. And what did he say? It's fascinating. This crisis, when Muhammad Hijab said, well, is this the crisis? Is this? No, that's not the crisis. He said, no, that's not the crisis. The crisis was of understanding and knowledge. What understanding? What knowledge? Well, really, it's this. But he didn't want to talk. He didn't want to say that this was the crisis. But this is exactly the crisis. It's obvious that this is the crisis. And that's why he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to do it in a 20-minute soundbite. And he said that this is not for you to. This must be done behind closed doors. And then we're going to get the damaged stuff coming up. But it's fascinating that he's talking about this emperor with no clothes on.
Yeah.
Remember he brought that up?
Yeah.
And then he quickly shut up. He didn't want to go through with that because he realized he is the emperor with no clothes.
Yeah.
Actually, he is the one that's actually that the emperor. He is the one that's naked.
Or really, all of Islam and its presentation of the history of the Quran, right? Like they're walking around like we've got this awesome explanation here. We've got this perfect book, and
Why did he bring that into the conversation?
Yeah, I know. Does
he not know the rest of the story?
Yeah,
Does he not know about the little girl that actually says, well, he has no clothes on?
Yeah, guys, do you understand the story? This is Yasir Qadhi brings it up, right? He says
he brings it up.
Yeah,
and
he says
stopped it halfway when he realizes, I'm the one I'm the emperor.
Yeah,
and
the Western academics are the kids who say, look, you're naked. What's wrong with you? You idiots! You're naked. Right, and so he does. So he immediately shut that one down.
He shut it down. He didn't want to go any further. He realized I can't say anymore. The camera's on me. Yeah. I better not say anymore. I'm going to be seen naked. But then he goes on and then he talks about. He says, the academics, they don't have these issues which we have. And I say, yes, that's absolutely true. Yasir Qadhi, you live in America. We are Judeo-Christian society here. We ask everything. You look at this whole idea of criticism, this whole idea that has to do with redacted criticism. We're talking about source criticism. We're talking about literary criticism. Where do you think those were invented? They were invented on this book. All those criticisms, the whole historical critique was all created on the Bible. As Christians, we've always opened our Bibles up to criticism. Who do you think Wellhausen is? He was a Christian. What do you think the Tübingen School was doing in the 1800s in Germany? They were doing the whole documentary hypothesis. It all came about the Bible. The Bible has always been put up to criticism. The Bible, we've always allowed it to be criticized. Our Lord Jesus Christ, he himself put himself up to criticism. He wouldn't let anybody defend him. Even the one time that Peter took out that sword to defend him in the Garden of Gethsemane, what did Jesus do? He turned towards Peter and says, put away your sword. I don't need that kind of defense. I don't need the sword to defend me. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. That's in Matthew chapter 26. And you can see this kind of criticism is something that Christianity has dealt with for 2,000 years. And that's why when you come to a Judeo-Christian environment like we have here in the West, our schools are based on that kind of critical thought. Our whole Bible is the one that created that critical thought. You would not have historical criticism or redacted criticism or source criticism, any of these criticisms without the Bible. And that's where our good friend Yasir Qadhi has had to do his schooling. And here he was at Yale University 25 years ago, and he started hearing these claims and these criticisms of something as simple as qira'ah. That is not very damaging. That is not very difficult. He's going to find out there's much more difficult things way beyond the qira'ah that we're going to introduce tonight, that Dan Brubaker is introducing. Once he gets to that, let's see what crisis of faith he's going to have then. But remember, we don't go beyond that, he says. We have a respect for the Quran, and I think there's the problem right there. It's that respect that we're saying, hold on a minute, that respect makes you naked.
When you do a deep dive is when things get very, very awkward and difficult.